Greetings and welcome back to the broadcast. Baruch haba Hashem Yahovah. Blessed is he who comes in the name of Yahovah. That is a line that we're going to hear from Jesus today as we visit Matthew 23, which is a continuation of Jesus just tearing into the religious leaders of the day. The last two chapters, he's given parables about how the kingdom is going to be taken away from them and given to another, one that would receive by faith. And just this chapter, he just really lays into them and warns the people not to follow after the Pharisees and the Sadducees. You see, the thing is with Judaism, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but a lot of people think Judaism is this idea that they just observe the Old Testament. But in reality it's mostly oral tradition. So they have what they call the oral Torah, and basically they go by whatever the rabbis have said. And so the rabbis believe that whatever they say is scripture and can even trump the Torah. So this is obviously a problem. So they make up all these rules and these things, and they heap them on top of people, and people can't observe them and follow them. It's impossible. And it's just a way to keep control. And a lot like what religion does today. So Jesus is just tearing into this idea. Now the very first few verses are very interesting and controversial, and we'll have to have a little discussion about it. Just to set the stage and get things started. So let's go ahead and begin, and you'll see what I mean. So remember, we're just continuing on this conversation. He's standing before the Pharisees and the Sadducees and upon a multitude of people. Matthew 23, verse 1. Then spake Jesus to the multitude and to his disciples, saying, The scribe and the Pharisee sit in Moses' seat. All therefore whatsoever they bid you observe, that observe and do. But do not after their works, for they say and do not. All right, before we can even move forward, we've got a huge problem, right? We've got a huge issue with the text, because Jesus has been ripping these guys, and as we read on, you're going to see him telling them that they're basically the sons of hell, that they won't be entering into the kingdom. Yet in verse 3 here, he says, verse 2 and 3, he says, the scribes and Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. All therefore whatsoever they bid you observe. Now that doesn't make any sense, does it? Jesus is saying, watch out for the Pharisees and Sadducees. Watch out for the leaven of the Pharisees. He's telling them, he's making all these parables, warning them that their destruction is coming, which we know happened in 70 A.D., and all this, but then he's sitting here telling the people to do whatever the Pharisees say. That's a huge problem. And what we have, I believe, is a translation issue, unfortunately. And, there's no perfect translation in English. And any translation, my friends, is also an interpretation. And I don't have a lot of time to spend just talking about that today, but here's what's going on. And so I'm going to first read you a little snippet out of the chronological Gospels, because we know how to fix this issue now, because there have been several manuscripts of the book of Matthew discovered that were written in Hebrew. And what's interesting about this verse is it's a little bit different in the Hebrew Matthew, and the difference makes sense and makes all the difference in the world. All right, so let's see. All right. Let me read a little bit of commentary here, and it'll all make sense. The seat of Moses was a literal seat in the synagogue in which the sages and Pharisees sat to proclaim their oral Torah. When I just explained to you what the oral Torah was, it's basically whatever the rabbis make up, which became binding law upon anyone who willingly submitted to the self-proclaimed authority. The Hebrew Gospel of Matthew The ancient Hebrew text of Matthew's Gospel states plainly that the followers of Yeshua are commanded to follow are commanded to not follow the takanot and the ma'asim of the Pharisees, the oral Torah, but they should do whatever he says, Moses, meaning Moses, to do, in clear opposition to what the Pharisees teach. So here's what it says. Here's the difference that it says in the Hebrew Matthew. What we're reading here that's translated in English for us is, all therefore whatsoever they bid you observe. But what it actually says in the Hebrew is, all therefore whatever he says observe and do. So it would read something like this: the scribes and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat, whatever he says, meaning Moses, observe and do, but do not do what the Pharisees do. Now that makes a whole lot more sense, doesn't it? Now what's interesting is I haven't got out my HalleluYah Scriptures version of the Bible in a very, very long time. And if you know what that Bible is, basically they've swapped out some words with the Hebrew words, and they're supposed to use the Dead Sea Scrolls and some other things as part of their translation. There's some issues that I have with the HalleluYah Scriptures that I've pointed out, and there's issues that I have with sacred name text in general, but more for Christian social issues than the book itself. But I went to it, I got it out just this morning, literally just 10 minutes ago, and I thought, man, I wonder if they used the Hebrew Matthew when they did the translation. Here's what it says in the HalleluYah Scriptures. Then Yeshua spoke to the crowds and to his Talmudim. Talmudim means disciples. Then Yeshua spoke to the crowds and to his Talmudim, saying, the scribes and the Pharisees sit on the seat of Moshe. Therefore, whatever he says to you to guard and do. But do not do according to their works, meaning the Pharisees, for they say and do not do. And that might be the best translation that there is in English to the Scriptures here in Matthew 23. So, if you've read that and you've been confused in the past, I'm sorry we had to spend like 8 minutes on that. That's what it's referring to. Jesus is not saying, the Pharisees are going to burn in hell and the kingdom's being taken from them, but you better do what they say. No, he's saying do what Moses says, not what the Pharisees do. Because the Pharisees observe their own oral Torah, their own man-made rabbinic laws. They themselves are not observing Moses, as Jesus points out and has pointed out throughout the Scriptures. So now I'm tempted to half read the rest of this out of the HalleluYah Scriptures, but I don't know. I think I'll just stick with the King James for now. Let me see here. I just really found that interesting. Whenever I come across something like this, and then I see something that actually gets it right, you know what? I am going to do that. Since the HalleluYah Scriptures got this portion right, we're going to stick with it for the rest of the teaching. A little changing up on the fly. And any of the Hebrew words I'll translate on the fly for you. All right. Now that we got past that, we can dig right in. Let's keep going. Okay, so we'll just start over. Then Yeshua spoke to the crowds and to his Talmudim, saying, the scribes and the Pharisees sit on the seat of Moshe. Therefore, whatsoever he says to you to guard and do, but do not do according to their works, for they say and do not do. For they bind heavy burdens hard to bear and lay them on men's shoulders, but with their finger they do not want to move them. And they do all their works to be seen by men. And they make their tefillin wide, and the length of their seats of their garments. And they love the best places at feast, and the best seats in the congregations, and in the greetings, and in the marketplaces, and to be called by men, Rabbi, Rabbi. But you, do not be called Rabbi, for one is your teacher, HaMashiach, that is to say, the Messiah. And you are all brothers. I want to stop right there real quick, because one thing that I'm seeing a lot of on Christian television and even on YouTube is these Jewish believers, right? And they still call themselves rabbi. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but I can't take you serious as a Christian If you say that you're a follower of Yeshua, a follower of Jesus, but you're still calling yourself rabbi, I just can't take you seriously, because Jesus clearly is pointing out here one of the faults of these Pharisees. They like the best seats in the synagogues. They make their seats wider so that they're more, so they can stand out. They love all the best seats, and they love to be called rabbi. And then he goes on to say, don't call anyone rabbi, because there's only one, and that's Mashiach, right? That's Messiah. Verse 9, and call none on earth your father, for one is your Father who is in the Shemayim, which means heavens. Again, same problem. People bow down to the Pope and call him Holy Father, even though and he loves to be called Holy Father, even though the Scriptures plainly say right here, Jesus is plainly saying, you don't call these men Father, and you don't call them Rabbi. I could go on and rant about that forever. Let's move forward. Neither be called leaders, for one is your leader, HaMashiach, which means Christ, Messiah. But the greatest among you shall be your servant. And whoever exalts himself shall be humbled, and whoever humbles himself shall be exalted. But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you shut up the rain of the Shemayim before men, the rain of heaven before men. For you do not go in, nor do you allow those who are entering to go in. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you eat up widows' houses, and for a show make long prayers. Because of this you shall receive greater judgment. And the King James says greater damnation. I like that translation better. Here's one of the things they were doing, is taking, and this is what you see, on what they call Christian television. Oh, send us your money and we'll make a long prayer for you, right? You've got people who are broke, who are just desperate. They're going to lose their house. They can't put food on the table, and they're watching some guy on TV saying, "Send me your last dime," and all the floodgates of heaven will be opened, and all these blessings will be poured out. And then people send them the money, and guess what? They don't get to eat. Their house gets foreclosed on. That's kind of the same situation the Pharisees were doing with the widows. And the Scriptures say that those who are doing that, those vipers, those hypocrites, those wicked men who pretend to be spokesmen for Jesus, but really they're just con artists stealing your money, they're going to get a greater damnation than the rest of the world, and deservingly so. Verse 15, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you go about the land and in the sea to win one convert, and when he is won, you make him a son of Gehanim, twofold more than yourselves. Another area where the King James translates it better. King James says, woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you can pass sea and land to make one proselyte, and when he is made, you make him twofold more the child of hell than yourselves. Jesus just called the Pharisees children of hell. That is bold. I mean, he's standing before the religious powers and saying, you guys are sons of hell. And when you go and you make a convert, your convert becomes twice the sons of hell that you are. That's what he's saying. Verse 16, woe to you, blind guides, who say, whosoever swears by Mishkan, and it does not matter, but whosoever swears by the gold of the Mishkan is bound by oath. Mishkan, he's talking about the temple. People swearing by the temple, and then people would swear by the gold in the temple. Verse 17, fools and blind, for which is greater, the gold or the Mishkan that makes the gold Kodesh, meaning makes it holy? Jesus is saying, you guys are foolish. I mean, what's more important, the gold or the temple itself, which makes the gold holy to begin with? Because they would swear by the gold in the temple, I swear, blah, blah, blah. Verse 18, and whosoever swears by the altar, it does not matter, but whosoever swears by the gift that is on it is bound by an oath. Fools and blind, for which is greater, the gift of the altar that makes the gift Kodesh, meaning holy? He then, who swears by the altar, swears by it and by all that is upon it. And he who swears by the Mishkan swears by it, by him who is dwelling in it. And he who swears by the Shemayim, that means the heavens, swears by the throne of Elohim and by him who is sitting upon it. Woe to you, scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites, because you tithe the mint and the anites and the cumin and have neglected the weightier of the Torah, the right ruling and the compassion and the belief. These need to have been done without neglecting the others. Again, a lesson we could take away and apply to the church today. We have people who get all worked up over the little arguments about how to observe the Sabbath, or, pick your thing, the rapture. And people get all worked up about these things, but they neglect the things that are heavier. That's what Jesus is saying. You neglect the weightier things of the Torah, is what he's telling the Pharisees. You get all worried about these little details of these little things, but then you neglect the big things, like showing love and compassion and caring and right ruling, justice, right? He says, you have neglected the weightier things of the Torah, the right ruling of the compassion and the belief. Verse 24, blind guides, you strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. And see, that's what people will do. They'll get all upset. Oh, you picked up a stick on the Sabbath. Ooh, I can't believe that person's doing that. You're not truly saved. And then they'll go inside and watch pornography, right? That's basically what's going on here, is they'll get all worried. They'll strain out a gnat and then swallow a camel. Verse 25. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. How many times does he call them hypocrites? Over and over and over. That's a word and a warning for leaders today, for church leaders, congregational leaders, even people like me on a podcast. Be very careful about being a hypocrite. Woe to you, scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites, because you clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they are filled with plunder and unrighteousness. Blind Pharisees, first clean the inside of the cup and dish, so that the outside of them becomes clean too. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you are like the whitewashed tombs, which outwardly indeed look well, but inside are filled with dead men's bones and all uncleanliness. In other words, you have the appearance of having it all together. Got on nice clothes, but inside you're dead, filled with unrighteousness. Verse 28. So you too outwardly indeed appear righteous to men, but inside you are filled with hypocrisy and lawlessness. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, because you build the tombs of the Nebaim, meaning the prophets. In other words, he's saying you guys are responsible for the death of the prophets. And it's true. The religious people, just like the parable that Jesus told, they would kill the prophets when God sent them to him, and then they kill God's only son, as we will see later on. And of course, if you're a Christian, you already know all this, right? And decorate the monuments of righteousness, and say, if we had lived in the days of our fathers, we would have not taken a part with them in the blood of the Nebaim. In other words, they're saying, oh, if that would have happened during our day, we wouldn't have killed the prophets. But Jesus is going to go on to say, yeah, you would. Verse 31, thus you bear witness against yourselves that you are the sons of those who murdered the Nebaim, and you fill up the measure of your fathers. Serpents, brood of adders, how would you escape the judgment of Gehinnom, meaning hell? Because of this, see, I send you Nebaim, I send you prophets, and wise men and scholars. Some of them you shall kill and impale, and some of them you shall flog in your congregations and persecute from city to city. So that on you should come all righteous blood shed on the earth, from the blood of the righteous Habel to the blood of Zechariah, son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the Mishkan and the altar, the temple and the altar. He's saying judgment's coming upon you guys for what you've done. And it did. In 70 AD, the Romans came in, tore down the temple, not a stone was left on top of another, and blood ran through the streets. That was their punishment for rejecting the Messiah and murdering all the prophets, right? Verse 36, truly I say unto you, all this shall come upon this generation. He's pointing to them and saying, this is all going to come upon this generation. And like I said, it did in 70 AD. Yerushalayim, Yerushalayim, Jerusalem. He says it twice, Yerushalayim, Yerushalayim, killing the Nebi'im, the prophets, and stoning those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together, the way a hen gathers her chickens under her wings, but you would not. See, your house is left to you laid waste. Again, another prediction of what was going to happen in 70 AD. For I say to you, from now on you shall by no means see me until you say, Baruch, blessed is he who is coming in the name of Yahovah. Baruch haba Bashem Yahovah. And that is the end of chapter 23. A little bit different style today. I hope that's okay. And I hope that you enjoyed it and got something out of it, learned something today. And I'm sure that, like I said, I always say this all the time. If you're listening to the Word of God, you're being blessed, plain and simple. Even when it's somebody who's as flawed and miserable as I am doing it. What an interesting chapter. And, you've probably heard me say that saying in Hebrew all the time. And the reason that I say it is because it was one of the first sentences that I learned in Hebrew. But because Jesus says he's not, we're not going to see him again until you say, blessed is he who come in the name of Yahovah. So, by the way, we all know that God's name is not Lord, right? That's just what we say in English. And so, I try to say it as often as possible, because I want that to happen. And of course, Jesus is quoting Psalms 118, verse 26. And if you look at it, you'll see, blessed is he that comes in the name of the Lord. We have blessed you out of the house of the Lord. And of course, the Lord there is the Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. Baruch haba Bashem Yahovah. That's all I got for you this morning. I hope that you found this morning's teaching interesting, if nothing else. And hey, you know what? You might disagree with me on the verse dealing with the seed of Moses, but I feel pretty confident in that. And like I said, there's several Matthew manuscripts that say the same thing. It also makes more sense. And so sometime we'll talk about all the Hebrew manuscripts that have been found. There's a lot. And Nehemiah Gordon has discovered all the Gospels, has found all the Gospels in archives from different libraries and stuff around the world that have held and preserved these things. All 4 Gospels in Hebrew. The book of James in Hebrew, which uses the word Yahovah and those same vowel points. This is what's interesting. You know what? I'm just going to leave it there, and maybe sometime we'll talk about it. And maybe if I get some time today, I'll try to post the videos where Nehemiah Gordon talks about it on my website. Peace and grace be with all of you. Until next time, God bless.